Jake Morrison walked through the empty halls of the council station for the last time. His footsteps echoed in the silence as he carried his single bag toward the docking bay. Behind him, the human embassy stood empty and dark. Every computer had been wiped clean, every file deleted, every trace of human presence carefully removed. The other ambassadors watched him go with confusion and growing worry. Chancellor Vexithera of the Zalari Empire tried to block his path near the transport hub. Her tall blue form towered over Jake, but he simply walked around her without a word. She called after him in her melodic voice, asking what was wrong, begging him to explain. But Jake never looked back. 3 months earlier, humans had been everywhere in council space. They ran the communication networks that kept the galaxy talking to itself. They operated the early warning systems that watched for pirates and hostile aliens. They maintained the trade routes that brought goods from one end of the galaxy to the other. They were the diplomats who solved problems between different alien races who could not understand each other. Now, they were gone. Captain Lisa Hayes powered down the research vessel New Horizon as it sat in orbit around the Joint Science Station. Her crew moved with quiet efficiency as they packed up 7 years of research data. The alien scientist who had worked beside them for so long stood at the viewing ports, watching in stunned silence as the human ship prepared to leave. Dr. Kethfor, a mantis-like creature from the hegemony, tapped on the airlock door with his clawed hands. He had been Lisa's research partner for 4 years. They had discovered 3 new forms of life together and written dozens of papers that advanced galactic science. Now she sealed the airlock without letting him aboard to say goodbye. The alien tried to communicate through the comm system, his translated voice crackling with static. He wanted to know why the humans were leaving, what they had done wrong, if there was some way to fix whatever had gone bad between them. Lisa turned off the communications array and ordered her ship to depart. On Kepler Station, Dr. Ryan Carter supervised the shutdown of the xenobiology laboratories. His team moved quickly and quietly, packing up equipment and research samples that had taken years to collect. The alien researchers who shared the facility tried to stop them, but the humans had legal ownership of most of the advanced equipment. The Zarathi scientist Velnara pleaded with Ryan as he loaded the last of the genetic sequencers onto transport carts. She reminded him of their joint project to cure the plague that was killing her people. They were only months away from a breakthrough that could save millions of lives. Ryan handed her a datapad containing all their research notes and walked away without speaking. Commander Amy Rodriguez stood in the main communications hub that coordinated messages across 12 star systems. The facility hummed with the sound of quantum processors and hyperspace transmitters that kept 43 different alien civilizations connected to each other. Most of the alien technicians had no idea how the complex human-designed systems actually worked. Amy began the shutdown sequence that would take the entire network offline. Warning lights flashed red as system after system went dark. The alien supervisors rushed toward her, shouting questions and demands in a dozen different languages. She finished entering the shutdown codes and walked toward the exit. Behind her, the communications hub fell silent for the first time in 20 years. Trade Minister Quindal of the hegemony tried to reach the human colonies through emergency channels. Every call went unanswered. Every message bounced back as undeliverable. The human settlements that had been thriving trading posts just days before now appeared completely abandoned. Ships that approached found empty buildings and deactivated defense systems, but no signs of where the humans had gone. The council called emergency sessions every day for weeks. Representatives from 43 different species gathered in the great chamber where decisions had been made for the galaxy. For over 1,000 years, they argued and debated and demanded answers that no one could provide. The humans had simply vanished without explanation. Chancellor Vexithera paced before the assembled delegates, her blue skin shifting darker with stress. She had worked with Jake Morrison for 7 years and thought she understood humans better than most aliens did. They were stubborn and emotional, quick to anger and slow to forgive, but they always talked through their problems. This silent departure made no sense to her. Keeper Zorthvan of the Archive spoke in his ancient, creaking voice about the historical records. In 10,000 years of galactic civilization, no species had ever withdrawn from the Council so completely and suddenly. There were records of wars, of trade disputes, of territorial conflicts that lasted for centuries, but never had an entire race simply disappeared without any attempt at negotiation or explanation. The economic reports began coming in after the first month. Trade routes that humans had maintained for decades started failing as pirate attacks increased. The early warning systems that monitored dangerous sectors of space went dark one by one. Communication delays between distant systems grew longer as the human-maintained relay stations stopped working properly. Some council members thought this was all a negotiating tactic. Humans were known for their cleverness and their willingness to take risks that other species avoided. Perhaps they were trying to show the council how important they were, expecting to be invited back with better terms and more respect. Others worried that something terrible had happened to humanity. Maybe they had all been killed by some unknown enemy, or struck by a plague that forced them to retreat to their home systems for safety. Search parties were organized to investigate human colonies, but every expedition found the same thing: empty buildings, deactivated machinery, and no clues about where everyone had gone. As the months passed, the galaxy began to feel the effects of humanity's absence more and more. Systems that had run smoothly for decades started breaking down. Problems that humans had quietly solved for years suddenly became major crises that threatened the stability of entire sectors. The Council had grown used to humans being there to handle the difficult jobs that other species found too dangerous or too boring. Now those jobs were not getting done, and no one else seemed able or willing to do them. The galaxy was learning what it meant to function without the humans who had become its unnoticed foundation. 6 months after the humans vanished, the first real disaster struck the outer colonies of the Zalari Empire. The attack came without warning in the dead of night, when most of the colonists were sleeping in their homes. The Void Runners had returned. Captain Dexmari of the Zalari Defense Force received the distress call while his ship patrolled the inner systems. The message was broken and filled with static, but he could hear the terror in the colonist's voice as she described ships with black hulls and red markings descending from hyperspace. Then the transmission cut off completely. The Void Runners had been the most feared pirates in the galaxy for over 2 centuries. They attacked without mercy, stealing everything of value and leaving nothing but wreckage behind. Their ships were fast and well-armed, their crews ruthless and experienced. For the past 7 years, they had been almost completely inactive, with only scattered reports of minor raids in the furthest reaches of space. Admiral Kate Bennett had been the reason for their absence. Her joint Human-Zalari task force had hunted the pirates across 3 sectors, destroying their bases and capturing their leaders. The remaining Void Runners had fled to the dark spaces between stars, too afraid to show themselves while Kate's ships patrolled the trade routes. Now, Kate was gone with the rest of humanity, and the pirates knew it. The attack on Colony 7 was just the beginning. Within weeks, Void Runner fleets struck at a dozen different settlements across the Rim territories. They moved with confidence and coordination, no longer afraid of the swift human response that had kept them in hiding for so long. Defense Coordinator Len Parker had operated a network of monitoring stations throughout the dangerous frontier zones. These remote outposts were staffed by humans who seemed to thrive in the isolation and constant danger. They watched for signs of pirate activity, hostile alien movements, and other threats that could endanger peaceful colonies. The monitoring stations had been humanity's gift to galactic security. Other species found the work too stressful and lonely, but humans had volunteered for these assignments in large numbers. They lived for months at a time in tiny stations surrounded by empty space, watching sensor displays and sending reports back to the Council's defense forces. Now the stations were going dark one by one. Some had been abandoned when the humans left, their automated systems failing after months without maintenance. Others had been destroyed by pirates who no longer feared immediate retaliation. The galaxy's early warning network was collapsing, leaving entire sectors blind to approaching threats. Engineer Sam Collins had designed and maintained the hyperspace relay stations that enabled faster-than-light communication across the galaxy. The relay network was a marvel of human engineering, allowing messages to travel between distant star systems in hours instead of years. The relays required constant adjustment and repair. Hyperspace was a hostile environment that corroded metal and disrupted electronics in ways that were still not fully understood. Human engineers had developed special techniques for working in hyperspace, using equipment that other species found too dangerous to operate. As the relay stations began to fail, communication across the galaxy became slower and less reliable. Messages that once took hours to deliver now took days or weeks. Entire sectors found themselves cut off from the rest of galactic civilization, forced to rely on slower-than-light communication methods that had not been used for centuries. The HFY hegemony's economic system started showing serious strain as human-operated trade routes collapsed. Cargo ships that had followed safe paths protected by human patrol fleets now found themselves under constant attack. Insurance rates for shipping increased by 500%, as companies tried to cover the losses from pirate raids. Trade. Minister Quindal watched his carefully organized economic networks fall apart piece by piece. The humans had not just been participants in galactic trade, they had been its backbone. They operated the shipping companies that moved goods between systems, the security firms that protected valuable cargo, and the communication networks that coordinated complex multi-system transactions. The minister tried to replace the human-operated services with companies from other species, but none of them could match human efficiency and reliability. Zalari shipping companies were too slow and cautious. Hegemony security firms were too expensive and bureaucratic. The ancient archive species were too inflexible to adapt to changing conditions. Captain Morthak of the Zalari fleet led a patrol through Sector 7, where 3 major trade routes intersected. The area had been completely safe for years under human protection. Now it was becoming a graveyard of destroyed merchant ships and abandoned cargo containers. His sensors detected the wreckage of the cargo vessel Bright Star, which had been carrying medical supplies to a plague-stricken colony. The ship's hull was split open and its cargo bay was empty. The crew had escaped in life pods, but their valuable cargo was gone. The colony would have to wait months for replacement supplies, if any, could be found at all. The pirates were not just stealing cargo, they were disrupting the entire flow of goods and services that kept galactic civilization functioning. Medical supplies, food shipments, manufacturing equipment, and raw materials were all being intercepted or destroyed. Entire industries were shutting down because they could not get the resources they needed. Dr. Nina Foster had spent years studying the behavioral patterns of various criminal organizations while working as a xenopsychology consultant for the Council's Law Enforcement Division. Her research had helped develop the strategies that Kate Bennett used to hunt down the Void Runners and other pirate groups. Nina's work had shown that pirates were not random raiders, but organized businesses that responded to risk and opportunity, like any other enterprise. When the risk of capture and punishment was high, pirate activity decreased. When enforcement was weak, piracy flourished. The sudden absence of human patrol fleets had created a perfect opportunity for every criminal organization in the galaxy. They knew that the remaining Council forces were confused, disorganized, and spread too thin to provide effective protection. The time was right for a massive expansion of pirate activity. Chancellor Vexathera called another emergency session of the Council, but fewer representatives attended than before. Travel between systems had become too dangerous for many species, and the communication delays made it difficult to coordinate meetings. The great chamber that had once been filled with delegates from across the galaxy now echoed with empty spaces. Those who did attend brought reports of increasing chaos in their territories. The Zorathi delegation described entire colonies being abandoned as residents fled pirate raids. The Cathani representative spoke of trade wars breaking out as species competed for the few remaining safe shipping routes. Keeper Zorthvin consulted the ancient archives for historical precedents, but found nothing comparable to the current crisis. The galaxy had faced pirate uprisings before, but never while simultaneously losing its primary defense and communication networks. The situation was unprecedented, and getting worse every day. The Council tried to organize joint defense forces to replace the missing human fleets, but coordination was nearly impossible without reliable communication. Different species had incompatible weapon systems, conflicting tactical doctrines, and centuries of political grudges that made cooperation difficult. Meanwhile, the pirates grew bolder with each successful raid. They began attacking not just merchant ships, but also military patrols and government facilities. Some pirate groups started claiming territory, declaring entire star systems to be under their control. The galaxy was learning a painful lesson about the true cost of humanity's silent departure. 1 year after humanity's departure, the galaxy's worst nightmare arrived from the void between stars. The Deep Space Monitoring Station at the galaxy's edge detected them first, massive organic shapes moving through the darkness, consuming everything in their path. The devourer swarm had returned. Keeper Zorthvan trembled as he accessed the most ancient records in the archive. The last devourer incursion had occurred over 3,000 years ago, and the records from that time were fragmentary and damaged. What little information survived described creatures that fed on entire star systems, leaving nothing behind but empty space and cosmic dust. The first system to fall was an uninhabited one at the galaxy's outer rim. Long-range sensors watched, in horror as the devourers surrounded the system's star and began to drain its energy. The star dimmed and died within hours, while the creatures grew larger and multiplied. Then they moved toward the next system. Intelligence Officer Greg Mitchell had tried to warn the Council about this threat years earlier. His deep space sensor arrays had detected unusual patterns in the cosmic background radiation that suggested something massive was approaching from beyond the galaxy's edge. He had presented his findings to the Council's Security Committee, but they dismissed his concerns as human paranoia. Greg had spent 3 years analyzing the data, cross-referencing it with historical records and theoretical models of extragalactic threats. His reports clearly showed that the devourers followed predictable cycles, returning to feed every 3,000 to 4,000 years when their population grew too large for the resources in deep space. The Council had ignored his warnings, because humans were considered too aggressive and militaristic. Other species believed that Greg was trying to justify increased military spending and human expansion into the outer rim. They thought he was seeing threats that did not exist because humans always expected conflict and prepared for war. Now, the devourers were here, and Greg's predictions were proving accurate in every terrifying detail. Commander Beth Turner had overseen the construction of a secret defense network during her final years of service. Hidden weapon platforms had been placed throughout the galaxy's outer rim, disguised as research stations or communication relays. These platforms were equipped with advanced human AI systems that other species had banned as too dangerous. The Council had passed laws restricting artificial intelligence research after several alien civilizations had been destroyed by their own creations. Human AI development was considered primitive and reckless because it incorporated aggressive and adaptive behaviors that made other species uncomfortable. Beth's weapon platforms used these same aggressive AI systems to analyze enemy behavior and adapt their tactics in real time. The platforms had been designed specifically to counter threats that traditional Council forces could not handle, including creatures like the devourers that learned and evolved with each encounter. Unfortunately, when the humans left, they took the activation codes for the weapon platforms with them. The Council's first encounter with the devourers ended in complete disaster. Admiral Kexthala led a joint fleet of 200 ships from 6 different species to intercept the creatures before they could reach inhabited systems. The fleet represented the largest military force the Council had assembled in over a century. The devourers destroyed the entire fleet in less than an hour. The creatures' adaptive shielding neutralized every weapon the Council forces used against them. Energy beams were absorbed and redirected back at the attacking ships. Particle weapons were deflected harmlessly into space. Even nuclear missiles were consumed by the creatures' defensive systems and converted into additional biomass. Traditional Council military doctrine was based on energy weapons and defensive shields, technologies that had proven effective against every known enemy for thousands of years. The devourers rendered these weapons completely useless, as if they had been specifically designed to counter the galaxy's standard military equipment. Dr. Nina Foster's classified research files, discovered in an abandoned human facility, contained detailed analysis of devourer biology and behavior. Her work revealed that the creatures were vulnerable to specific electromagnetic frequencies and kinetic projectile weapons, but only if the attacks were coordinated in precise patterns that overwhelmed their adaptive capabilities. Nina had spent 2 years studying tissue samples and energy readings from the previous devourer incursion, working with human military engineers to develop counter-strategies. Her research showed that the creatures' greatest strength was also their weakness. Their ability to adapt to new threats meant they could be confused and overwhelmed by rapidly changing attack patterns. The problem was that Nina's research required weapons and tactics that only humans used. Other species had abandoned kinetic weapons centuries ago as primitive and inefficient. Human military doctrine still incorporated ballistic projectiles, explosive devices, and electromagnetic pulse weapons that other civilizations considered obsolete. As system after system fell to the advancing devourers, the Council began to understand what they had lost when humanity departed. Human military technology had seemed crude and barbaric compared to the elegant energy weapons used by other species, but it had been designed to handle exactly this type of threat. Captain Tony Rodriguez had developed evacuation protocols during his service as a human military planner. His procedures could move entire planetary populations to safety within hours, using a combination of military transports and civilian vessels. The protocols had been tested and refined through dozens of emergency drills across human-controlled space. The Council's evacuation efforts were chaotic and ineffective by comparison. Different species had incompatible transport systems and conflicting ideas about evacuation priorities. Military commanders argued with civilian leaders while millions of lives hung in the balance. Entire populations were left behind because no one could coordinate an effective rescue operation. Engineer Matt Thompson's deep space exploration teams had discovered something important in the months before humanity's departure. Long-range surveys had detected artificial structures beyond the galaxy's edge, remnants of an ancient civilization that had faced the devourers before. These ruins contained technology that could potentially stop the creatures permanently. Matt's reports found in encrypted files on abandoned human computers described weapons and defensive systems that operated on principles unknown to current galactic science. The technology required specific neural patterns to activate, patterns that seemed to match the unique brain structure that humans had developed through their evolutionary history on Earth. The ancient civilization that built these ruins had apparently shared some characteristics with humanity. They had been warriors and builders, creatures that understood both cooperation and conflict in ways that most galactic species did not. Their technology responded only to minds that could balance aggression with compassion, violence with mercy. Lieutenant Colonel Dan Brooks had led human expeditions to establish a foothold near these ancient ruins. His mission reports described months of careful study and experimentation as human researchers learned to interface with precursor technology. The work was dangerous and difficult, requiring volunteers who were willing to risk their minds and lives for the good of the galaxy. Dan's team had made significant progress in understanding the ancient weapon systems, but they needed time to fully activate and deploy the technology. The decision to withdraw from Council space had been necessary to protect this work from interference and sabotage by species that feared human military capabilities. Chancellor Vexithera stood in the Council chamber as reports came in of the latest devourer victories. 12 systems had fallen in the past month with billions of lives lost. The creatures seemed to be accelerating their advance, growing stronger with each world they consumed. The remaining Council members looked to her for leadership, but she had no answers to give them. Every strategy they tried failed against enemies that adapted faster than their weapons could be modified. Every evacuation plan broke down due to lack of coordination and resources. For the first time in her long political career, Vexithara began to understand what Jake Morrison had tried to tell the Council years earlier. Humans had not been preparing for war because they wanted conflict. They had been preparing because they understood that conflict was inevitable. The galaxy was facing extinction, and the only species that might be able to save it had vanished without a word of explanation. As the devourer swarm consumed a third of the galaxy, Chancellor Vexithara made a decision that would have been unthinkable just months earlier. She authorized a desperate mission to find humanity and beg them to return. The proud Zalari Empire, which had considered humans to be primitive and aggressive, was now ready to surrender its dignity for the chance of survival. Captain Morthak of the Zalari fleet volunteered to lead the search mission. He had worked closely with human commanders during joint patrol operations and understood their tactics better than most aliens. His ship, the Swift Current, was one of the fastest vessels in the Zalari Navy and could cover vast distances quickly. The search team included representatives from 12 different species, each hoping their presence might convince the humans to help their particular civilization. Dr. Velnara brought samples of the plague that was still killing her people, hoping that human medical knowledge might provide a cure. Trade Minister Quindal carried economic data showing the collapse of galactic commerce, thinking humans might be motivated by profit. Finding humanity proved more difficult than anyone had expected. The humans had not simply packed up and moved to a new location. They had executed the most sophisticated disappearance in galactic history. Every trace of their presence had been carefully erased from Council databases and navigation charts. Captain Tony Rodriguez's evacuation protocols had been more thorough than anyone realized. The human colonies that other species remembered visiting were completely gone, with no evidence that they had ever existed. Even the orbital installations had been dismantled and their materials recycled, leaving empty space where thriving settlements had once operated. The search team followed faint energy signatures and gravitational anomalies that might indicate where large fleets had traveled. They investigated reports from merchant captains who claimed to have seen human ships in distant systems. Every lead turned out to be a dead end or a case of mistaken identity. After months of searching, they discovered that humanity had not just hidden their new location, they had hidden the fact that they were searching for something. Deep space sensor logs overlooked by other species because they seemed unimportant showed that human exploration vessels had been conducting systematic surveys of the galaxy's edge for years before their departure. Engineer Matt Thompson's exploration teams had been looking for something specific, using search patterns that covered enormous volumes of space with careful precision. The survey data suggested they had been following ancient star charts or archaeological evidence that pointed toward targets beyond the galaxy's normal boundaries. The breakthrough came when Dr. Velnara analyzed the mathematical patterns in the human search coordinates. Her species had a natural talent for complex calculations, and she recognized that the humans had been using geometric progressions based on galactic rotation cycles. They were looking for something that moved in predictable patterns relative to the galaxy's structure. Following these calculations led the search team to the galaxy's edge, where long-range sensors detected artificial structures that had never been cataloged by Council surveys. The ruins were enormous, clearly the remnants of a civilization that had possessed technology far beyond anything the current galaxy had achieved. Captain Morthak approached the ruins carefully, scanning for defensive systems or other dangers. His sensors detected energy readings that were still active after what must have been thousands of years. The ruins were not dead. They were dormant, waiting for something or someone to awaken them. As they moved closer, the team discovered signs of recent human presence. Equipment signatures matched human technology, and debris patterns showed where human ships had established temporary installations. The humans had been here, working to understand and activate the ancient technology. Lieutenant Colonel Dan Brooks had left behind detailed logs of the human expedition's progress. His reports described months of careful research as human scientists learned to interface with technology that operated on completely alien principles. The work required volunteers to undergo dangerous neural modifications that allowed their brains to communicate with the ancient machines. The ruins contained weapons and defensive systems designed to fight enemies like the devourers. The ancient civilization had faced the same threat thousands of years ago, and had developed technology specifically designed to counter creatures that could adapt to conventional weapons. Their solutions required operators with specific mental characteristics that matched human psychology. The precursor race had apparently shared humanity's unique combination of cooperation and aggression, the ability to work together while still maintaining individual identity and initiative. Their technology responded only to minds that could balance competing impulses and make decisions under extreme pressure. Dan's logs revealed that the humans had spent over a year learning to activate and control the ancient weapons. The process was dangerous and often fatal. Many volunteers had died or suffered permanent brain damage while attempting to interface with the alien technology. But gradually, they had made progress in understanding how the systems worked. The most important discovery was that the precursor weapons could not just destroy devourers. They could prevent the creatures from adapting to future attacks. The technology somehow locked the devourers' evolutionary mechanisms, making them vulnerable to weapons that had previously been ineffective. Captain Morthak's team found evidence that the humans had successfully activated several of the ancient weapon systems. Energy readings showed that massive installations were drawing power from sources that Council science could not identify or understand. The humans had achieved something that no other species in galactic history had managed. Intelligence Director Carol White's classified files, discovered in a hidden data cache, revealed the true reason for humanity's withdrawal: Council security. had been compromised by devourer infiltrators, shape-shifting scouts that had been preparing for the main invasion by gathering intelligence about galactic defenses. Carol's intelligence network had identified several high-ranking council officials who were actually devourer agents. These infiltrators had been subtly sabotaging defense preparations and steering council policy away from effective anti-devourer strategies. They had been the ones pushing for restrictions on human AI research and military development. The humans had realized that they could not trust the council with knowledge of the precursor ruins or the weapons needed to fight the devourers. Any information shared with council leadership would eventually reach the infiltrators, who would find ways to counter the ancient technology before it could be deployed effectively. General Kevin Adams had coordinated humanity's withdrawal as a strategic necessity. The humans needed to access the precursor weapons without alerting the devourer agents to their plans. The only way to do this was to disappear completely, leaving the infiltrators with no way to monitor or interfere with their activities. The search team realized that humanity's apparent abandonment of the galaxy had actually been an act of self-sacrifice. The humans had given up their comfortable lives in council space to undertake a dangerous mission that might save everyone. They had accepted exile and isolation to protect information that could be the key to galactic survival. Dr. Velnara analyzed the energy patterns coming from the activated precursor installations and calculated that the humans were nearly ready to deploy their new weapons. The power levels were approaching critical thresholds that suggested the ancient systems were preparing for massive operations. Captain Morthak sent a message toward the human installations, identifying his team as council representatives seeking to establish contact. The response came not from the humans directly, but from an automated system that delivered a simple message: stay clear of operational zones, defensive deployment commencing soon. The search team retreated to a safe distance and waited, knowing that the fate of the galaxy now rested with the species they had once dismissed as primitive and warlike. Humanity had found the weapons needed to stop the devourers, but whether they would choose to save the galaxy that had rejected them remained an open question. The human fleet emerged from hyperspace like ghosts returning from the dead. Captain Steve Harrison led the formation as hundreds of ships materialized around the devourer swarm that was consuming the core worlds. But these were not the same vessels that had left council space over a year ago. They had been transformed by technology that made them appear almost alien. The ships moved with fluid grace that seemed impossible for mechanical constructs. Their hulls rippled with energy patterns that shifted and changed like living tissue. Weapon systems extended from their frames like organic appendages, and their engines left trails of light that pulsed with mathematical precision. Chancellor Vexithara watched from her command ship as the human fleet approached the devourers that had been unstoppable for months. Her own forces had retreated to minimum safe distance after losing 3 more battle groups to the creature's adaptive defenses. She expected to witness another futile attack that would end in human destruction. Instead, she witnessed something that challenged everything she thought she knew about warfare and physics. The human weapons did not fire energy beams or launch missiles. They projected fields of force that seemed to reach directly into the devourers' biological systems and turn their own adaptive mechanisms against them. The creatures that had evolved to counter every previous attack suddenly found themselves unable to change or adapt at all. Dr. Helen Wright coordinated the assault from the flagship Redemption. Her consciousness partially merged with the precursor AI systems that controlled the ancient weapons. The neural interface allowed her to think at superhuman speeds, processing tactical information and adjusting attack patterns faster than any biological mind could manage alone. The devourers tried to adapt to the human attack, but the precursor weapons prevented their evolutionary responses from functioning. Their defensive systems failed as the ancient technology locked their biological processes into fixed patterns. For the first time in recorded history, the creatures found themselves vulnerable to conventional weapons. Captain Lisa Hayes led a squadron of modified research vessels that had been converted into mobile weapon platforms. Her ships targeted individual devourers with precision strikes that disrupted their neural networks and caused them to lose coordination with the rest of the swarm. The creatures began attacking each other as their collective intelligence broke down. The battle lasted only hours, but it reversed the course of a war that had seemed hopeless. Devourers that had consumed entire star systems were reduced to inert biomass floating in space. Their adaptive evolution, which had made them nearly invincible, became a weakness when controlled by technology they could not understand or counter. Commander Amy Rodriguez established communication networks that allowed human forces to coordinate across the entire galaxy simultaneously. The precursor communication systems operated outside normal space-time, enabling instant contact between fleets that were thousands of light-years apart. Human commanders could now respond to devourer attacks anywhere in the galaxy within minutes. The transformation was not limited to human technology. The humans themselves had been changed by their interaction with the precursor ruins. They moved with enhanced coordination and spoke with voices that carried harmonic frequencies that affected alien psychology in subtle ways. They had become something new, something that operated on a scale beyond normal galactic civilization. Jake Morrison returned to the Council Station as humanity's new ambassador, but he was no longer the man who had left over a year ago. His eyes held depths that seemed to contain knowledge of cosmic processes beyond galactic understanding. When he spoke, his words carried weight that made even the most arrogant council members listen with respect. He delivered humanity's message to the assembled delegates in the Great Chamber that had once dismissed human concerns as primitive paranoia. The humans would protect the galaxy from external threats, but they would no longer participate in its political systems. They had evolved beyond the need for conventional diplomacy and governance. The price the Council had paid for underestimating humanity was the loss of their guardians' participation in galactic society. Humans would continue to maintain the defense networks and early warning systems that kept the galaxy safe, but they would do so from the shadows, operating beyond the reach of political interference. Dr. Nina Foster explained the new reality to the stunned council members. The precursor ruins contained knowledge of threats that existed beyond the current galaxy, cosmic dangers that made the devourers seem insignificant by comparison. Humanity had accepted the responsibility of defending against these threats, but the work required capabilities that other species could not understand or support. The humans had learned from the precursor civilization's history that this galaxy was just one of many, and that creatures far worse than devourers moved between galaxies like predators hunting for new feeding grounds. The ancient weapons were just the beginning of what would be needed to ensure long-term survival. Engineer Sam Collins supervised the deployment of a new galactic defense network that operated on principles beyond current scientific understanding. Monitoring stations appeared throughout space, constructed by automated systems that built themselves from raw materials gathered from asteroids and dead planets. The galaxy would never again be caught unprepared for external invasion. General Kevin Adams revealed that humanity's withdrawal had been planned for years, as they gradually realized the scope of the threats facing galactic civilization. The decision to leave without explanation had been necessary to protect their work from interference by species that would have tried to limit or control human military development. The devourer infiltrators in the Council had been eliminated. During the recent battle, their shape-shifting abilities useless against precursor technology that could detect and target their true biological signatures. Carol White's intelligence network had identified every agent and removed them with surgical precision that left no trace of their presence. Captain Tony Rodriguez announced that humanity would establish new colonies beyond the galaxy's edge, where they could continue their work without endangering other species. The precursor technology required operators who could handle its psychological demands, and prolonged use had effects that made humans increasingly incompatible with normal galactic society. The Council was left to govern a galaxy that they now understood they had never truly controlled. Humanity's withdrawal and return had demonstrated that Earth's children operated on a scale that made traditional politics and diplomacy irrelevant. They had become the galaxy's guardians by accepting responsibilities that other species could not imagine bearing. Trade Minister Quindall attempted to negotiate new economic agreements with the human representatives, but was politely informed that humanity no longer needed anything the galaxy could provide. Their technology could manufacture any required materials from basic elements, and their energy sources drew power from cosmic processes that made stellar engineering seem primitive. Keeper Zorthvin updated the archive records to include humanity's new classification as a transcendent species, a category that had only existed in theoretical discussions about evolutionary possibilities. The humans had joined the ranks of the mysterious precursor civilizations that had once protected the galaxy, and then vanished into cosmic history. The final scene played out as human ships began disappearing into deep space, heading toward distant galaxies where new threats were stirring according to precursor warnings. Captain Steve Harrison's fleet moved beyond the edge of known space, carrying weapons and knowledge that could protect entire galactic clusters from dangers that had not yet been imagined. The Council remained to govern the species that still needed traditional civilization, but they did so with the knowledge that their continued existence depended on guardians they could no longer see or contact. Humanity had paid the price of transcendence to become the protectors that the galaxy needed, but did not deserve. Chancellor Vexithara stood alone in the council chamber, looking out at stars that seemed somehow different now that she understood how fragile galactic civilization really was. Somewhere in the darkness beyond those stars, humans were standing guard against threats that would have destroyed everything she cared about. The price the Council had paid for dismissing humanity was learning that they had been children playing at governance while the adults quietly kept them safe from monsters in the dark.